won the coin toss. Actually, as it turns out, I've been a member a little longer, so some of the things I say will actually go back a little further, perhaps, in what Marty will share. First off, again, my name is Dave Gerlach, and it is nice to be back here with you again. I know some of you were here perhaps a couple of years ago when I shared about a spirituality of simplicity, and in our time together I was mentioning how intentionally trying to simplify one's life and decluttering one's abode leads to greater contentment and happiness in life. And it was fun sharing that story, and I was really impressed with the questions that you had, both afterwards and during coffee hour. It was really great to be here and to see your new building, and just to see the enthusiasm that you have in the fellowship. Just one quick shameless promotion. I will get a chance to come back again, and I'm planning to be back in May. I think it's early May sometime, I've forgotten the exact date, where I get a chance to talk about pantheism, which happens to be a spirituality, a religious perspective that is extremely compatible with the principles of Unitarian Universalism. So I think you'll find that most interesting. So I have a lot to cover about that at that time. But today, of course, we're here to talk about something entirely different, and we are asked to share about our perspectives relating to growth and welcome as it happened at the Fox Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. And as you might already know, or maybe would guess, it's a very tricky thing to distill down the elements that make up that alchemy of growth. But certainly for us at our fellowship, growth was never really a straight line, continuous upward movement. There would be periods of growth, and then there'd be periods where we plateaued in cycles that kept going on like that. But I think for me, if I were to summarize the basic elements that led to our overall growth in Fox Valley, I would surely have to include a minimum of at least 5. First, in no particular order, incidentally, an attitude of being welcoming of growth. Secondly, getting a building of our own. Thirdly, getting a really wonderful professional staff. Fourthly, reestablishing a very good RE program, religious education program. And fifthly, fostering a healthy leadership and decision-making process. Now, to give you a little background about my involvement at our fellowship in Appleton, I first began attending in 1974, and as I was reflecting upon and listing my involvements in the fellowship over the years, I realized that I had served in over 20 different positions. And trying to distill down the more important roles from those 20 plus that I served in, I would say about 8 of those stand out as of greater importance in terms of leading to growth and greater welcome. First, certainly, I was president of the fellowship. Second, I helped to form and was a member of a membership committee. I was the chair of the original building search committee. That was the building before our current building. I was also the chair of that original building funding committee. I headed a committee for funding of the religious education and basement remodeling project. I was the chair of the ministerial search committee. I was the chair of the finance committee and chair of the long-range planning committee. Now, just going back a little bit in time to how I first became a UU, and it started after first rejecting my Lutheran religious roots of my youth. And at that point, I did launch into a long search for a new church. I was checking out all the many different denominations that were available in the Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls area where I grew up. And during that time, I settled upon becoming a Unitarian Universalist during my college years. And I was certainly hoping to continue attending a UU community when I moved to Appleton after college, but I had trouble even finding the fellowship at that point in time, and I really looked for it. But once I finally found the group after several months of looking for it, I found that they were really not all that welcoming. They really even exuded a sense of being particularly wary of growth. and I found that particularly troubling. For when I became president then in 1976, I specifically called for greater openness and acceptance of new members in the congregation. Now, I suspected as president pretty early on that religious organizations which lack the desire for growth will inevitably lead in time to declining membership and stagnation. And that's exactly what was happening there at the Fox Valley Fellowship at that point in time. Now, certainly every group experiences change over time, and there's generally a yin and yang that goes on in every congregation. But I believe that unless there's really a palpable feeling of acceptance and welcome given, it is too easy to fall into decline. But one thing that was pretty wonderful is that at every major juncture in the fellowship life, that our congregation was given input into decisions about whether or not we still wanted to grow. And at every time, the desire for continued growth was reaffirmed. And that was a very pleasing change to me, because it didn't feel that way originally. Now, certainly the big thing I think for us was buying a building of our own in 1981 after a 25-year history of rented space. You know, having a building really lent credence and a sense of legitimacy to us as a religious group, both of which were so lacking in our old rented quarters. Plus, you know, it's really very hard to run a very effective and appealing religious education program in rental space, since you can't even put things up on the walls, at least not permanently. And those items that you hang up on the walls really do help to identify and foster Unitarian Universalism in students and children. One thing you may recall, see a number of you are about my age, that in the 80s it was a particularly difficult time to try to buy a building because of the unusually high interest rates offered by the banks. And even at those exorbitant rates, it was still very difficult to even secure a loan, even if we wanted to pursue a commercial bank loan. Fortunately, we did receive a lot of help from the Unitarian Universalist Association during that purchase of our first building. But the UUA also happens to be a very good resource for help in many different areas of growth. Now, returning back to the subject of religious education, having a good religious education program served as a really important magnet for attracting young families, which actually constituted the bulk of our growth in the early 80s in our then new building. Marty Wheeler here and Deb Andrews, who couldn't make it today, they and their families were part of that expansion of young families. And I can't stress enough the importance of religious education to growth. In the mid-'80s, with fewer and fewer children coming, we made the fatal mistake of disbanding our RE program. And instead, we had the children go over and attend the UCC church RE program. Boy, what a mistake was that. Not only did we lose our kids, but we lost their parents as well. And very soon after that point, about all we had left in attendance were some young single people and some older childless couples. And what a shame that would have been if we had disbanded entirely. And we were pretty close to disbanding entirely because the membership declined so precipitously. Now, looking at the ministerial presence within our fellowship, one of the things that we noticed way back in the 1970s was that whenever we invited ministers to come and preach to us from the different UU churches around, or from the Meadville Lombard Divinity School in Chicago, that we had increased attendance at services. But still, we didn't take to ministerial presence too easily for fear that we might lose our autonomy. But seeing the good response the fellowship got when those occasional ministers did appear on some Sundays, we opted to hire a minister a quarter time. We thought that'd be about enough, once per month. And we had a minister who came from Wausau, and he would preach, he would attend our meetings, he would do some pastoral care and other miscellaneous duties. But over time, eventually some problems did arise, and we did part ways with that particular minister. But it wasn't too long after that that we decided to hire an extension minister. And at that time, there was a program, an extension ministry program, where once again we got some financial help from the Unitarian Universalist Association to do that. And that program was designed to last for a 5-year period. And it was designed to get ministers into fellowships to see how ministerial presence would be accepted. And the minister's role then was to boost membership, to help set up governance structures, to assist in any way that was necessary. Plus, it also gave time for congregations to see how it felt to have ministerial presence in-house. For us, after about a 3 or 4 year period, I can't remember exactly how long, that person did opt to accept a call from a different congregation and left. There were some serious issues that arose during that period of time as some turf struggles erupted, because it was sort of difficult determining how to share duties and power with the minister. But it was not at all certain whether that minister would have been called as our full-time minister, even if that person had wished to stay, because once again, some conflicts that arose. But nonetheless, the membership did want to continue having ministerial presence. And so a 9-member ministerial team was elected to do a search. And that team did a very careful job of looking for a minister that would be a very good match for our type of fellowship. Once again, we got a lot of help and guidance from the Unitarian Universalist Association during this process. And the result of our search in 1990 is that we called our very first settled minister, Roger Birchhausen. And he has been an absolutely fantastic blessing for our congregation. We have experienced amazing growth during his tenure with us. As a matter of fact, he just got back yesterday from sabbatical, and oh my goodness, the welcome, he was blown away by the excitement and the welcome back after being gone for several months. Now, regarding the time of the late 1980s and the early 1990s, we were very fortunate to have had a good staff, which helped to relieve the members of a lot of stress of having to do everything to put on our many different programs at the fellowship. Now, along with our minister, we started out with some secretarial help and a director of religious education. With professional staff, and especially our minister, Roger Birchhausen, we were treated week in and week out with very quality Sunday services with more of a spiritual bent, rather than services that felt a little bit like a lecture series that our Sunday services previously really exuded. And we started to grow fairly quickly. Another thing I'd like to lift up under Roger's gentle leadership is that we began to move in a direction of becoming more and more welcoming of the lesbian, gay, transgendered, and bisexual community. And now we actually have a very significant percentage of our membership that happens to come from that community. And beyond that, we also have a very diverse theological membership that makes up our group. We have Buddhists and pagans and Taoists, pantheists, Jews, Christians, and atheists, among others, that make up our fellowship. And Roger has made it very clear that there is room for all types of people within our midst, and he extends an extremely hearty welcome to all of them. Now, in addition to Roger, our paid staff now includes an assistant minister, a director of religious education, an office administrator, secretary, music director, congregational life coordinator, bookkeeper, and nursery staff. So it's not just Roger that provides the impetus for growth. It really comes from all of our staff working as one team to make our fellowship experience wonderful there. Plus, their work helps to make our congregation's volunteers' lives much easier as well. Now, Of course, one of the biggest fears that happens to arise from growth that happens in any congregation is the fear of the loss of intimacy. And it is certainly true as we approach 700 members that it is impossible to know everybody, as I once did when we had less than 100. But even when there were less than 100 members, I knew everybody's faces and names, but my wife and I probably only socialized and hung around with maybe a couple dozen or so folks. And that really is about the same number as now, at 700. And it's also true that many of my current friends happen to be newer members, as friendships do change over time. So I'm very grateful for these new friends that I have met over the years. And without being open to growth, I would never have met these newer members. There was never a time when I thought, okay, this is a perfect group, let's close the doors. No, really, I have always felt that we must always leave the light on for anyone who wants to join us, to come and to be welcomed within our fold. That, of course, causes some changes, but happily, so many of those changes that have happened have been so absolutely positive. And now, we can support so many different small group activities and programs that we were just too small previously to launch. And even with the size that we are at this point in time, people do still find their niches. And from those places, they often draw their most intimate friendships. So, my recommendation is not to give in to fear, but rather to embrace growth and seek a bold future of your dreams. I still find many good places in small groups to help make my fellowship life very rewarding and fulfilling for me. For example, I'm a member of the UU Book Club, I'm a member of the UU Men's Group, I'm a member of the UU Pantheist Group, and all of these are very important places for me and for my involvement. And you know, as a father, and many times I've reflected upon my son's growing up years, and I often miss my son from that period of age 3, age 7, 11, and maybe 15 in college years. But I still love him the way he is right now at age 32. And in many ways, it is very similar to the changing life of a fellowship. As it progressed from 100 members to 200 members to 3, 4, 5, and now as it approaches 700. Certainly at many times I kind of miss the fellowship life at the different membership points. But I do fully appreciate and would choose the way it is right now and the way that it will become over time to the way that it has been. And I feel a deep satisfaction for all of my contributions that help toward the growth of our fellowship. And I'm so grateful that we as a group had the insight to choose the path of growth and do what we could to continue its progress. And so my wish for you here in Fond du Lac is for success with continued growth and also for continued satisfaction.
I could just say ditto. So I am Marty Wheeler, and I, like David, have done many things at the fellowship, from being the president to serving on finance committee membership, personnel, co-chair of the capital campaign when we built our current building, have sat on the building steering committee for the new addition, which is so close to being done. it's gorgeous. So anyway, I think David hit everything, so hopefully I'm not too boring and repeat too much. And I'm going to probably talk a little bit more about process and things than he did. But it was about 29 years ago that my family walked into the Fox Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship for the first time. We had been members of the Meeting House Unitarian Church in Madison, and having a UU church was an important part of our decision in moving to Appleton. At that time, the fellowship probably had around 75 members. In the language of those who study church sizes and the dynamics within the different sizes of a congregation, the fellowship was a pastoral size, meaning that the average weekend attendance of all children and adults was between 50 and 150 people. This is a church that was centered around a core of families, and everyone knew each other. The governing board was more like a committee called to run the life of the fellowship. If there had been a minister at that time, they would have been the center focus that everything revolved around. The year after we came, Jacqueline Collins was the first extension minister, and she came and she gave a consistent professional leadership. This did bring tension, as Dave mentioned, as we learned how to share this leadership, and we started to make some of the changes that were necessary for us to grow. Things like consistent starting and ending times of Sunday services, having a service that was organized, and then having that voice in the community of a minister and not a lay person, and a more solid connection to the UUA, and just the knowledge that a minister can bring in that will help you to grow. We struggled together as we wrote new bylaws. We remodeled our RE space, and we developed new programs and strengthened old ones. And the minister was a part of all of this. Sometimes we felt a little too much apart, but each time that we would have the discussion, do we want to grow? Do we want to continue with professional leadership? And I would say that at points it felt like we voted on that 3 or 4 times every year. But we kept that discussion alive, and it was always yes. And it wasn't that we wanted to grow because we could be a larger church or a larger fellowship. We felt that what we offered was worthwhile, that the world needed it, and that if there were people that wanted to walk through our doors and join us, it was our responsibility to have a place for them to join us. And that as we grew, we would all be better off in this world. So then we decided to call a minister, and Roger was called. And even at that time, we didn't want him in the pulpit every week. I think he was at least 3/4 time, but not every week. But we did want that leadership. We used the UUA guidelines for calling, and it was very, very successful. And about the first year that Roger came, we convened a new long-range planning committee just to look. Once again, it was a process. Who are we? What do we want to become? And how are we going to get there? And we would often do an exercise of, close your eyes and think about it's Sunday morning 5 years from now, and you walk into the Unitarian Church. What is it like? What do you experience? And using that, we developed a long-range plan, and it was very evident to us that if we were going to grow, we needed more space. And so then we had to look at, go through a whole process. Do we remodel and stay where we are? Do we buy another building, or do we build? In that process, discerning where we were, we did not have any off-street parking. We were extremely non-accessible if you had any kind of a mobility issue. And, what it would cost to revamp, to be more welcoming. And we decided that that building just wasn't going to work for us, and so we were going to look at another building or build. And we ended up building, and one of the nicest things, you guys have such a lovely building here that you may not appreciate, how accessible you are, but when we got in our new building, we had a children's concert, and it was so fun to see 2 people come in wheelchairs, and they could come in. And that's something that wasn't able to happen in our other building. So as we went through this process and did the long-range planning, we visited other UU churches. Plagiarism is basic to all culture. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go and see what other churches are doing. But there's a transition point from when you have about 150 members, where you transition from that pastoral-centered church to a program-centered church. And it is one of the hardest transitions for a congregation to make, and they often don't make it. That's a lot of times where congregations will get stuck. As you move into a program church, it's more of the small groups. You're no longer centered around the minister. The minister becomes more of a champion of helping lay leaders lead the groups and doing the Sunday morning preaching and stuff. You'll have committees meet and groups meet without the minister there. You would be looking at, if there was in a social event, the minister would not always be there. So that's a transition that the minister has to make, and it's the congregation has to make. We rewrote our bylaws to work in that kind of a structure where we had members at large, and they would connect with the committees, but you didn't get committee reports at board meetings. The board became more of the focus of what is the vision and how do we meet it. And the committees did a lot more of the work. And the minister, along with his professional, presence on Sunday mornings, was more of a trainer for leadership. On one hand, that sounds like you're kind of taking power away or leadership away from the lay leaders, but in my opinion, you're actually more empowering them, because you have a committee structure now where the committees are doing some really hands-on nitty-gritty work, and they don't have to go back to the board to get permission for everything you do. So you've widened that circle of leadership and of people that are involved and connected. And it also allows for more programming, more small group ministries, which is where you're going to connect with others and have that more intimate relationship that so many of us are seeking when we join a religious community. And the other thing I always stress is process. The times we did process well, things went well. The times we shortchanged the process, we paid the price. So just keeping that open, transparent process where everyone feels that they have a voice. And in the long-range planning, we would do neighborhood meetings. The committee would write up what they heard, and then they would take it back to the membership and say, this is what we think we heard, and get feedback and tweak as needed. And then eventually come up with a plan that needed to be that we would vote on. So we had the one long-range plan that got us to our building, and then once we got in the building, we did another long-range planning process. Now we're here, that really focused more on staffing and programming. And in that one, we wanted to add staff and become a fair compensating congregation. And we had a 5-year plan, and we reached all of our goals sooner than expected. So that was the good thing. Our membership really stepped up, and that's how we got, in that long-range plan, we knew we wanted to add staff, but we hadn't quite defined what that would look like. And just in looking at what our mission was, is why we got a membership coordinator, who we now call our congregational life person. And that's made such a difference in having that professional person that's there every Sunday, that really starts to know new members and works with them and walks them into finding a place within the community and feeling welcome. Then it hasn't always been smooth. When we were in the throes of building our current building, we were in the throes of transition sizing, and learning how to do church differently. And there may have been a little conflicty stuff that went on. And we worked through it. And we came up with a healthy congregation committee. We developed the principles for how we are in community with one another, and I know you have also done that. I saw those on your website. And that's so critical. And now we have a healthy congregation committee, and if there's ever a little friction that happens, it gets addressed immediately. I assume the committee gets used. I haven't had to go to them. But, you know, so it's a very quiet, but it keeps the community flowing and functioning without a lot of conflict. I'm pretty happy to say that we've done this building phase, had a minister on sabbatical, and are hanging in there really well, I think. So that's the good news. So I guess that's my thing, is understand the structure of congregations and how you transition through, and be aware of that, that is gonna be changed, and we all have to do a little something different. And I just so respect our founding members who, you know, we've had them stay active as long as they were alive. And we're not the community they founded, but we are, you know, and they've allowed us to grow and evolve. And I think Dave and I have tried to do that, and all of our leaders, is as things have changed, you know, and I'll admit there were times my little heels got dug in. But the bottom line is, we are such a much richer community, and we have that life-saving message that we are getting to more and more people, so it's worth the work. Use the UUA, they're a great resource. And last night I went to service, and I walked in, and Dave Gerlach is the only person I saw, well, Mary, his wife, that were people that I knew the first day I walked into the church, even though it was a full house. And as I look around and see all those new people, some of them whom I don't even know their name, it's like they're all needed. They're who makes that fabric of that community. But the really nice thing is, every new member service, when new members are asked to share their thoughts about the fellowship, the same thing gets said at every service. It was such a welcoming experience to walk through those doors the first time. It was such a warm, inviting, energetic group to walk into. So that core of who we are, that's what I walked into 29 years ago. Not what Dave walked into. But it's been built and it's there, and it's very important. So I wish you well. It's exciting. You have a beautiful building. I think you're well on your way. So thank you for inviting us.